here.
Oh, you're live.
We're live?
You're live, so go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, it's straight up 6 o'clock, so let's get started. All right, good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out to yet another edition of Greene County Historical Society presents Greene County History. Tonight, July 9th, 2023, we're 93 years away from the last passenger revenue service on the Waynesburg and Washington Railroad, July 9th, 1929. So we talked about it and decided to go ahead and do it tonight on the anniversary. What we're going to do is we'll take you through a couple days of passenger service prior to July 9th, 1929, and then we'll step through the 6 trips that the railroad made on July 9th, 1929. So before we start,
I have a
yes.
question for you. It looks like, because I know they were bought out by the Pennsylvania, you can see where they've expanded it. So they still had service, it was just a Pennsylvania Railroad?
Oh, yeah.
Regular gauge now?
No. The W&W always was narrow gauge.
I know, well, you can see the
Yeah,
third
this is
rail,
a-
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, this is in Washington, PA. So the Pennsy served the Washington area on standard gauge, and the W&W served on the narrow gauge.
Right, but I mean, but did they still use the rail line after 1929?
Yes.
It's just that the waning wasn't on it.
Correct.
It went to regular gauge.
Yes, the Chartiers branch on the Pittsburgh, Chicago, Cincinnati, and St. Louis. That was the Chartiers branch from Washington, PA to Carnegie, PA. They still ran passenger service up until like the late 50s. I think it was 1954 was the last passenger service on the Pennsy going through this area. So we'll take you through the 6 trips. On July 9th, 1929, and just for some background, there are 3 books out there on the W&W, I'm sure everybody knows. 1983 was 3 Feet on the Panhandle. This was Morgan Gabert and Larry Kohler. What they knew in 83, they put in the book. I came through in October of 2003, found a bunch of photographs, put together basically a photographic history of the W&W. There's only 15 pictures in here that is duplicated on 3 Feet on the Panhandle. 2014, we put out the locomotive book. This book is still available in the gift shop here. This is the locomotive outside, obviously, and this is the history from build date of 1916 up until about 2000, what did I say, 14? Yeah, 2014. The crew is currently working on the 3rd W&W book. Since I published back in 2003, we found a lot more photographs, maps, more information, so we're going to call it the Comprehensive Guide to the Waynesburg and Washington Railroad. Put everything under 1 cover or 2 covers and call it quits. It'll have everything that we have W&W related. If you have a chance, go back to the W&W room in the West Wing. We got a lot of original artifacts back there from the railroad. And when we conclude here, we'll go out to the engine house, we'll do a walk around of the locomotive, and we can look at the restoration efforts we're doing on Coach 6, which is the only known piece of rolling stock left from the W&W. All right. So to have passenger service, you have to have passenger cars. I know it's a lot of reading, but the point here is this is the W&W passenger car roster from the first excursion gondola, which was a flat car, a construction terrain flat car that they put sides on it and benches and a cover, all the way up to Coach 6, Coach 5, some of the coaches that they bought from the Burlington and Western, and even an observation car, Coach Observation 13. You'll see that a lot in the presentation. But the point here is, you can see that a small line of only 28 miles, they own a lot of cars. Some of these cars were rebuilt. Like they take a full baggage car, turn it into an RPO, a railway post office. They had 2 RPOs. They would actually cancel mail on the RPOs between Waynesburg and Washington and drop it off at various places along the line.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. I have RPO marks on envelopes and postcards from the W&W. So the inaugural passenger train was November 5th, 1877. The locomotive was the General Washington, locomotive number 2. Baggage Market 1 was a home-built car, and Coach 1 was their first real coach that they bought from Bill Meyer Small. They had 1 passenger round trip on a per day. Tickets were sold for Coach 0, the smoker car, and the caboose if you wanted to ride the freight train. The Reporter, which was predecessor to the Observer Reporter, stated that the train arrives in Washington about 11 a.m. and it departs Washington about 1:30. So in the 1870s, they were running these 2 trains. Later on in the years, one-way ticket was $1.20 and a round trip was around $2. So all the information we have in the archives is showing in the heyday, like in the late teens and early 20s, $1.20, $2 for a round trip. So these are some of the timetables that we have in the collection. This is the earliest timetable from 1885 that we have, number 17. I haven't seen copies or original of anything prior to timetable number 17. This one's out of my personal collection from 1919. As you can see, in the heyday, they were running 4 trains daily and 2 on Sunday. But why I included this one, and the reason that we're here tonight, is this is a card from a taxi service in Washington. So when people would get off the train, the taxi cab driver would hand them this card. So we have the interurbans, which are the trolleys running in and out of Washington. Here's all of the Pennsy timetables. Here's all the W&W timetables. And here's the B&O. If you flip this card around, it tells all about the taxi and bus service. So they're basically killing the railroad by handing out these cards like, hey, come ride our taxi instead of the railroad. So I found that piece and I thought it was really interesting, and it's kind of why the railroad is in demise. The overall chart here is the blue line are daily trains and the orange line are Sunday trains. So if we start at 1877, they were running one train on a daily, 1 on a Sunday. Then it jumps to 4 trains daily, goes back down to 3, 4, then down to 2. And the Sundays go from 1 to 3 to 2. So in the latter 20s, they were running 2 daily trains and 2 Sunday trains. So it's kind of interesting. I charted it out one night going through all of the timetables to show how the progression of the railroad, how busy they got, and then it dropped off in the late 20s. Montage here just to show you some passenger trains. They did run excursions to the Greene County Fair and the Washington County Fair. This photograph up here is Chambers Dam. They ran a lot of picnic specials to Chambers Dam. It's hard to see, but the station's right here up on Chambers Dam. This is Washington, PA. This is Waynesburg, PA. This is Van Kirk. And a typical train were 3 coaches, a baggage car, or an RPO. The men of Greene County going to World War I on the W&W. This is out of Washington, or Waynesburg, I'm sorry. This is a passenger train at Reese's Mill. What's interesting here is you have the Jacobs Birdhouse, which is this piece, big piece right here. That's the Jacobs Birdhouse. I included this because, as you can see, most of the passengers getting off the train are businessmen. It was possible back in the day to board in Waynesburg, go to Washington, transfer to the Pennsy, go to Pittsburgh, and come back to Waynesburg in the same day. Long day, 10, 12 hours.
I just going to ask you.
Very long, yes. If you look at the timetables, it's 10 to 12 hours. It was basically all day. But a businessman from Waynesburg could travel to Pittsburgh and come back in one day. And I thought that was an interesting photo because of all the businessmen getting off the train. And lastly, just some more passenger service. This is up on Horseshoe Curve. This is at Hackney, and that's on Paul Trestle up outside of Washington. And again, 3 coaches, a head-end car, which is a baggage car, or an RPO. Then they have Rex, couple. This is RPO baggage 12, up on Conger, rolled over the hill. This is second locomotive number 1, which is a sister to number 4. They tried to use locomotive number 1 to pull 12 up over the hill. Tipped over the locomotive.
Oh, well, what caused it?
Let's see here. That's October, so it wasn't a heat kink in the rail. I mean, the rail could have been bad. It could have been vandalized. There's nothing in the archives that states why the train derailed. But since it was tipped over the hill, they burned it at site and salvaged all of the metal off of it. Now the sister coach to number 6 out here, Coach 5, they were sisters. They're exactly the same. This is up on Persimmon Curve in 1919 by Mount Wheeler. If you're going to Washington and you see the towers up on the hill, that's Mount Wheeler. One of the 5 curbs on Mount Wheeler is Persimmon. Number 5 tumbled, and number 4, the locomotive out here, was also damaged in this wreck. This is her tender right here, and where's Sam? I do believe now, Sam, that's why the engineer side of the cab is fixed because of this wreck right here. So as you can see, they're cribbing up the coach. Again, they didn't have a wreck train, they didn't have a wrecker coming in. This was all horses, mules, manpower, cribbing, block, tackle, the whole 9 yards. They got everything back on the rails, repaired, and within weeks it was ready to go. Obviously, number 4 is here. So let's get into the heart of July 9th, 1929. We wouldn't have these photographs if it were not for this man, Lyndon Roach. He lived in Amity. He was a big train enthusiast. He followed the W&W. He collected employee stories. He collected photographs. Most of the photographs that we are going to see in the presentation tonight are from Lyndon Roach. He was on the last passenger trains. So he chased the trains, rode the trains, photographed the trains, and that's the core of our photographic archives right now. Lyndon was going to write a book, but he died in 1976. Larry Morgan picked up his photographs and his notes and basically penned 3 feet on the panhandle. So this is obviously Lyndon in his latter years, and here's Lyndon in his early years. But I have original correspondence in the archives where Lyndon was writing all of these train enthusiasts across the countries, asking if they had photographs of the W&W, or he would trade narrow gauge W&W photographs for other narrow gauge stuff that he wanted. And I got a binder about 3 inches of all of his correspondence from like the 50s and 60s looking for information. He even has hand-drawn maps of Waynesburg Yard, what he thought it looked like. Some of the coaches are hand-drawn from the pictures, what he thought it looked like. Pretty interesting in the archives. So this is a lot to read, but I'll give you the 5 and 10 version. Instead of reading the words as I'm discussing this, look at the picture. The picture tells you why the passenger service ended.
The bus.
Route 18, improved highway, personal automobile. So as we came into the 20s, families could afford an automobile. Farmers or merchants could afford a truck. The highways were improved. You're not riding on mud. You're not driving on mud. You're driving on improved highways. So now I can get my goods to market on my own time. I can get from Waynesburg to Sycamore or Waynesburg to Washington in my personal car on my time. I don't have to wait on the railroad. So this is the ultimate picture of why the railroad passenger service ended. Route 18, personal car, and the railroad basically died. There were other things too. You know, the bus lines came in, as I talked about, as you saw in the card. The bus lines came in, so you know they were running more frequently than the trains. It got too expensive for the farmers to put their goods on the railroad. They were charging way too much money, so I just go buy my own truck and I put my goods on that. So,
Question for you, where exactly on Route 18 is that?
okay, this is go out 21, hang a right to Sycamore. Going out that road, probably 3 miles on the left. That's either Bridge 3, Mudlick Bridge, or Bridge 4, Taylor Bridge. I forget which one that is. It's on the left as you're going north.
Good.
So speaking of discontinuance of service, here's the notice that was posted on every station between Waynesburg and Washington. So this was posted on May 28th, stating that in a month, passenger service will end on the Waynesburg and Washington Railroad on July 10th, 1929. So a few days before passenger service ending, take note, you're going to see a lot of this train. This is locomotive number 1, coach observation 13, baggage express 12. This is on Elm Street Trestle, just off of Prospect Avenue in Washington, PA. They'll be coming down off of Elm Street Trestle, they'll cross Wade Avenue down into Washington Station. So in the latter years, they were running 1 locomotive, coach observation 13, and baggage express 12. So here's number 4 with 13 and 12 at Washington Station prior to July 9th, 1929. The W&W always had the outside track right here. So you had the outside track against the wall, the wooden boardwalk, and the Penzie always had the inside track because they were the big brother, so to speak. So every photograph that we have, the W&W is always on the outside track, the Penzie is always on the inside track. But both tracks were 3-railed for them to get through. So I threw a little color in here. This is not a color photograph. I have colorization software that you take black and white photos, you run them through the software, and it does a pretty good job. It gives you an idea of what it would look like. So again, we're on coach observation 13. You can tell that that's the coach. It has the 2 big observational windows and the brass ornate railings on the back. This is baggage express 12 right here, and number 4 is on the head end. So again, we're on the outside at Washington Station. So the colorization software does pretty good. The rolling stock was Tuscan red, so we're late in the passenger service years. They probably haven't painted the rolling stock for a long while. You can see all the soot damage right here from the locomotive. It's all blackened right here. And of course, it would be faded from not being painted. Number 4, 12, 13. That's what they ran right up before the end of passenger service. Harry Wood was the engineer at the time. Skinny Imes was the fireman, and Leisure Shaw was the conductor. They'd show up over and over and over again in these photographs. Washington Station with number 4, 12, and 13. It just wash, rinse, repeat. And again, baggage master, forget who, yeah, Harry's here, Skinny Imes, Jim Scholl's back there, and I forget who I think it was Johnson was the baggage master. So again, a few days, this is up at Braddock, number 13, 12. We got probably a newspaper reporter, I would say. He's unidentified, but I'd say it's a newspaper reporter to write everything for July 9th, 1929. And this is at Braddock Station. So Judge Chambers got a picture of Mr. and Mrs. Hazlett right here. This is on July 4th, 1929. Today, you go to Walmart or Target, and everybody's running around in their pajamas and slippers. Well, they're riding the train, and he got his best suit on, and she has her best Sunday dress on. And it's just amazing, you know, the dress back in the day. So let's get into July 9th, 1929. These are the 6 trips of that day. So trip 1 starts in Waynesburg. Locomotive 9681 is the motive power. Coach observation 13, coupled behind number 1, followed by number 12, baggage express 12. Go to Washington. Locomotive uncouples, goes to the yard, turns on the turntable, comes back, couples on to 12, 13 in tow, back to Waynesburg. Get back to Waynesburg, and everybody's standing there at Waynesburg like, we want to ride. And the officials are looking around like, okay, let's add another coach. So they go to the yard, pick out number 6, which is over in the engine house, couple it onto the Waynesburg train, take it to Washington. Get to Washington, Number 1 springs a leak, a cylinder leak, 4 comes out, couples onto the train, goes to Waynesburg. That's the end of revenue service. And they have 2 Kiwanis specials that all of the officials from Waynesburg and Washington got on to, I don't know if you would say fet the W&W, but to celebrate passenger service. So they threw on RPO2 in an open gondola with benches on it that the bands played. There were a couple like the Legion bands, they got on, and the band was playing all the way to Waynesburg, or all the way to Washington and back. And trip 6 is back to Waynesburg later that night.
That's unbelievable.
All this came to me one night. I'm looking at the photographs and I'm reading the captions, and then all of a sudden I got the entire story of the last day of passenger service in photographs. That's how this came together. So trip number 1. So we're down in Waynesburg Yard. It's the early morning of July 9th, 1929. I'm pretty sure, 99% sure, this is the train. So this would be locomotive 9681. As you can see, this is coach observation 13. And the reason why I think this is that train is I have a couple photographs in this collection with this young boy posed in the cab, posed on here, posed there. So probably mom, dad, and the son went down for the last train to ride. So we already went from Waynesburg to Washington on trip 1. Locomotive turns on the turntable, hooks back up. Now we're on the return trip to Waynesburg under trip 2. Locomotive number 1, now coupled to 12 with 13 in tow. We're just outside of Judge Chambers, as we saw with Mr. and Mrs. Haslett, heading to Waynesburg, south to Waynesburg. Okay, so this is what I was talking about. There's all kinds of people standing around the Waynesburg station like, I got my ticket, I'm ready to ride, and the officials are like, we got to add another coach. So number 1 disconnects from 12 and 13, goes to the storage yard. This is coach 6, right here, pulls it out of the storage yard, puts it in the consist. Hooks back up to the train. Now we're on trip 3, going north to Washington. And this is Arlie Pettit. He was a fireman in the latter days. You're going to see him over the next couple slides. Okay, so here's number 1. They're spinning it on the turntable, preparing it to go back to Washington for trip 4. So this is, we're in Waynesburg. This is the roundhouse, turntable, sand house, water, ash pit. So everything right there to service the locomotive.
Is that located, like I remember there was the station down on the south side, was the
Correct.
yard turntable
Yes,
all right there?
At the corner of Rich Hill and First, right there at that corner was the beginning of the yard.
Okay.
So the ash pit would have been right there, the sand house is right there, the roundhouse, and then in front of the roundhouse would be the turntable, and then the rest of the yard would be to the left. Where the tanks are now for Jacobs Petroleum, that was the station area right there.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Was that manual? In other words, he
Yes.
actually did that manually, no hydraulics or nothing? He actually.
Correct. These are called Armstrong turntables because you have to be Armstrong to turn them. Yeah. There are 2 spars on opposite ends of the turntable, and it's so well balanced that 2 men could turn a 42-ton locomotive.
Wow.
I mean, you gotta put your weight into it, but still, 2 men can turn a 42-ton locomotive. That's how balanced it
I've
was
seen this
on
before.
the pivot.
Wow.
Okay, here we go.
Why would they detach from the tender? Why would they turn them both?
What's that?
It's behind the engine, is that the tender?
Yeah, this is the tender.
Was it attached to the engine, or why did
Yes.
they put both of them?
Oh yeah, there's a drawbar in between, and then you have, I'll show you on the locomotive out here. Then there's 2 tubes that come from the tender for the water.
So it-
Yeah, they're always attached unless they're doing servicing. Yep. Okay, so this is another one I colorized. Here's coach 6, 13, and 12. So the locomotive number 1's up front here, getting ready to go trip 4 back to Washington. Again, the colors are pretty accurate. Again, you're gonna have soot, soot damage, so to speak, from the locomotive. The coaches haven't been painted in years, and of course, they're going to be faded. But what's neat is, I don't know if it's because of the software or this car hasn't been painted in a long time. As you can see, it's definitely either faded or a different color. And Pennsylvania is now on the letterboard. Since 1920, Pennsylvania was on all of the railroad equipment. Okay, so we're on First Street, if you know Waynesburg, on the south side, across from Waynesburg Milling. That's First Street. This is the First Street siding. Here's the station. So they're on First Street siding, getting ready to head back to Washington. Arlie Pettit, John O'Hara and his wife. John O'Hara was the guy that wrote Folk and Folklore. Is that the books? Bob. Oh, okay. I thought you knew him.
He worked for, he was a newspaper.
He was the newspaper guy. He wrote a lot of anecdotal stuff.
Facts and folklore.
Yes, that's it. Thank you, Judge Grimes. Yep. So that's him. Here's another picture. Getting ready. And here's Arlie Pettit in number 1. They're still ready to pull out. Okay. So this is early afternoon in Washington. Here's the big Pennsy train on this side. Here's the W&W. Number 1 is pulled in with coach 6, 13, and 12. So they arrived early afternoon. You can tell the locomotive is stopped because of the steam coming out of the Eames muffler. That's a vacuum brake, not an air brake. So to actuate the vacuum brake, you push steam through a Venturi system, and I'll show you on the locomotive out here, and it pulls the brake in. So this is steam escaping from the muffler to actuate the brake. Another good photo, just waiting for the locomotive to turn and head back to Waynesburg.
Question.
Yep.
Where was the turntable located in Washington?
Okay, you know where the station is?
Yeah.
On South Main Street. If you're looking north towards the PRR freight station up on
Yeah.
Chestnut.
Yeah.
So right across the street from South Main Street was the Washington Yard. So there was a three-stall engine house, turntable, coaling, dock, and sand pit, or ash pit, sanding. It was right across the street.
I've never seen pictures of that. Are there pictures of that?
Oh, I got it.
Oh, okay.
We can go all day on that. Yeah, I'll show you in the book here. Yeah, we can do that. Okay, so number 1, they're getting ready to disconnect. Head out to the yard and turn. I don't know who this young boy is, but he shows up in a lot of these photographs.
Shows the size comparison.
Oh yeah, standard gauge engine compared to the
Oh my
W&W.
goodness, I didn't even count.
Yeah, this is standard gauge Pennsylvania.
Wow.
And that's what is out here now?
This one,
Yeah, this,
well, her sister's out there.
oh, okay.
So we're crossing South Main Street right now, so we got Leisure Shaw protecting the grade crossing. He has the stop sign in his hand. So they're getting ready to disconnect, or go out to the yard, disconnect, and bring it back in. So again, this is still number 1. So at this point in time, Harry Wood realizes that number 1 can't make it back to Waynesburg. They have a leaking cylinder. Fortunately, unfortunately, however you want to say it, I say fortunately, number 4 was steamed and ready to go for some reason. So it got the honor to take the last passenger train back to Waynesburg. So here we are. So they've gone out to the yard, hooked up couple number 4, brought it back, starting to load passengers. Number 4 was always a freight locomotive. They were all the same. They were 42 tons, same tractive effort, but some were designated as passenger locomotives, some were designated as freight. Number 4 was usually a freight. So if you remember Lyndon Roach, those pictures I showed you at the beginning, this is his wife right here. I think this is the best photo of the entire series. number 4, 12, 13, and 6, getting ready to head back to Waynesburg. If you haven't caught on, which I'm sure you have, 4 and 6, the ones that are sitting out here, blurry, but very important. Harry Wood, engineer, oh no, Frank Johnson, baggage man, Harry Wood, engineer, Skinny Imes, fireman, and Leisure Shaw, James Shaw is the conductor. They posed for the last train back to Waynesburg. So here's 13 right here, 12, 6 would be here, and 4 would be on ahead. Colorize this one turned out pretty good. I'm happy with this. 12, 13, 6, and they're getting ready to pull out. If you read the nomenclature here, 60 patrons on the last one, 10 deadheads, non-paying customers, and the newspapers report that a boy from Sycamore bought the last ticket. Doesn't name the boy, there's no picture, but according to the newspaper article that we have, he bought the last ticket.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Is there panes in their windows, or are they open?
They're open.
Okay.
It's the middle, it's like hot like
That's what I
now,
thought.
so yeah, the windows are open. Okay, so it's after 4:30, the train is left on time. We got number 4, 12, 13, and 6 heading back to Waynesburg. This is the back end of number 6, and it just cleared the South Switch and Braddock. So they're on their way back to Waynesburg and should be there in about an hour or so. Blurry, but important. We're getting ready for the Kiwanis Special. The train has arrived in Waynesburg, disconnected everything, and started to put together the Kiwanis Special train. So officially, passenger service has ended at 6:15 as expected, and now they're getting ready to fet the railroad by assembling the Kiwanis train to go back to Washington. The Kiwanis in Waynesburg coordinated with the Kiwanis in Washington. They were doing picnics and parties and sing-alongs and just hooping it up for the rest of the night.
Excuse me, Jim,
Yep.
what kind of speed, if you figure how long it took them to leave from Washington to Waynesburg an hour, what was the average speed?
Average speed was 12 to 15 miles an hour on passenger.
Oh,
And you gotta remember, 28 miles, they had almost a station a mile. So they would just get up to speed, hit a station, stop. Get up to speed, hit a station, stop. There were 2 major grades between here and Washington, so they're pulling the grade both ways. So it really wasn't like you think fast freight or fast passenger service like today, Amtrak that's going 100 miles an hour.
Grading back in that time period with, more high-stepping locomotives.
Correct. Exactly.
Did they have to have helpers on this day with the passenger, like up out of
No.
Washington?
One locomotive can handle these consists. Now on the freights coming out of Washington, they double headed to Mount Wheeler. They take half of the train, half of the freight train to Mount Wheeler. The helper would go, they would go back, pick up the second part of the train, assemble it on Mount Wheeler at Summit Siding, and then come into Waynesburg. Passenger trains, the locomotive can easily handle that. What's interesting here, if you read again, as the Kiwanis Special left Waynesburg, a bunch of cars followed them all the way to Washington on Route 18. So on the improved roads, they were chasing the railroad all the way up Route 18. This is another good photo that turned out just spectacular. Again, getting ready for the Kiwanis Special. 4 is on right underneath the train shed right here. This is RPO Coach 2, 13, 6, and back here where you see the people standing, that's the gondola that the band was assembled on. So you can see how much activity the last day of passenger service garnered at this time. So also, this is important too, on on this Kiwanis Special, Harry Wood was too sad to take the locomotive, to take the train to Washington. Leisure Shaw didn't want to go. All of the regulars that ran the 4 trips at the beginning of the day, they all stepped aside because they couldn't do it. They didn't want passenger service to end, and they knew the railroad was in demise, and they just couldn't do it. So Doc Breeze, Charlie Loafman, Mr. Greenlee, and Walter Bone Cyphers jumped on to engineer, conductor, brakeman, and fireman for the last ones. So speaking of Laser Shaw, if everybody knows the story, or if you don't, so he's standing on the Waynesburg station platform. The Kiwanis Special is slowly pulling out of Waynesburg station. Everybody's, the band's playing. Everybody is just having a good old time. They're sad, they're happy. And as soon as the train went around Powerhouse Curve, it curves to the right to start to head to West Waynesburg, Leisure Shaw collapsed to the boardwalk. He was having health problems the past couple of days, and they said that he actually died from a broken heart. That in the newspaper, if you read the article, the train no more went through Powerhouse Curve. He collapsed and died there on the scene.
Wow.
And let's see here. Oh, right here. Yeah, his pallbearers were Harry Wood, engineer, Frank Holmes, the baggage master, Bone Cipher, brakeman, Jake Weaver, former brakeman, Sycamore station agent, John Church was one of the section foremen, and Jim Greenlee was the freight brakeman.
Wow.
Most everybody knows about this story, that he died from a broken heart. So that is the end of official passenger revenue service. They did run one more train, blurry but still important. On July 21st, 1929, Company K from Waynesburg came back from their annual training, and they steamed up locomotive and attached some coaches and rolling stock to bring them back from Washington into Waynesburg. So even though we had 6 trips on July 1929, which was the official last day of passenger service, they ran a special train to bring back the boys of Company K. So with that, we do have a Facebook page. It's very active. We track history, we track restoration efforts, we track museum events. Hit up the Facebook page to see what's going on here. We have over 1,100 members right now. We try to post a lot to keep everybody in the loop. And we'll end there with a huge thank you. Thanks for coming out tonight. Greatly appreciate it. We'll get stuff wrapped up here. Then if we want to go out to the engine house, we'll do a tour of the locomotive, do a tour of the coach, show you what's going on, and then at your leisure, you can look at the railroad room in the back. So thanks for coming out tonight.
When was the right-of-ways relinquished to the farmers? Or has it been?
I have researched the right-of-way up to a company called Engelhard. They bought it in 2 tracks, Greene County Park and Washington County Park, and that was like in the 70s. I haven't been able to research it from there. It all depends on what the original deed said. If the original deed said when the railroad's done with the property, it can revert back to the property owner. But I do have those 2 deeds that show that the right-of-way was broken up into 2 pieces. So it's.
Jim, I had that piece that I posted one time, it was out of the Pittsburgh newspapers from like 76. Yeah,
Oh my goodness, I gotta talk to you.
okay. You've seen that, because it said that right-of-way was land banked because of the energy we were going through in the 70s, and that rail line was land banked into some government entity or something.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and look at that. But I always wanted to go up to the courthouse and research it from 70 up until whatever the current day owner is. I have no idea who owns the right of way at this time. Bob?
Yeah, you forgot to mention that for a brief time, when the railroad was first built, you could get in a narrow gauge passenger car in Waynesburg and go all the way to downtown Pittsburgh.
Yes.
Without changing cars.
Yes.
Because there was a narrow gauge railroad that went from Washington to Pittsburgh. It was called the Pittsburgh Southern, and it was owned by the B&O. That stopped when the Penzi bought the W&W, obviously.
Yes.
But the Pittsburgh Southern was more hapless than the W&W. It was a pathetic railroad, but half the time, the Waynesburg and Washington, which didn't have that many locomotives, and had to lend their engines to the Pittsburgh Southern. But the Pittsburgh Southern had better passenger cars.
Correct.
So you could ride a Pittsburgh Southern passenger car on a W&W for a while. And the last thing is Arlie Pettit, you
Yes.
mentioned him. Fortunately, he lived long enough that when we had the engine running here in the 70s, his family brought him down from wherever he lived, Pittsburgh or something like that.
Yeah, we got
And
pictures.
he got to see it. He was all crippled up and he couldn't climb up in the cab because we were gonna let him run it. But he couldn't believe it was actually running. But that's all.
No, thanks, Bob, that's a very good point. I did this on purpose, to show that, and I'm still amazed, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've been writing, researching, talking about the W&W for over 30 years. It's just an extreme passion of mine. And it just blows my mind every time we come down here to work, is that we're actually working on the last locomotive, or the locomotive and the coach that was in the last passenger run. I mean, go through from California to New York, from Montana to Texas, pick out any of the railroads, and probably less than this, that you can actually illustrate this, that you can touch it, taste it, see it, talk about it, that it was in the absolute last passenger train. And I just feel privileged, and I know the rest of our crew does, that we're able to work on these pieces and hopefully get them restored back to, nice condition. It's amazing. I just pinch myself every time I come down here.
Well, excuse me, one thing I'm just amazed about, I know men are able to do pretty much anything, but when we've seen these, especially the huge train, any train, how men were actually able to build
Oh,
these
yes.
huge
Yes.
bodies like that. I mean,
Yep.
I just can't even imagine, because the weight of them, what did they use to hold them or hand them or whatever? It just,
Overhead
amazing.
cranes, a lot of lifts.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is narrow gauge, obviously, 3 feet between the rails, standard gauge 48.5. So if you put number 4 at 42 tons up against the big boy, it would look like a Matchbox toy. But you're absolutely right. The engineering that went into to locomotives and passenger cars and freight cars is just beyond belief. Beyond belief.
Yeah, or, even if you were to put number 4 up against something like a K4 Pacific, that would dwarf it.
Oh, absolutely. We saw the pictures in Washington.
Yes, of the G5.
Yeah, on the G5, it's just beyond that. Yes.
Could you just go over the ownership a little bit? I was curious because it was local subscription, right? When this started?
Yes.
They got money from the local
Correct.
farmers and people around the communities, right, to raise the money?
Yeah, keep me honest here, Bob, because I kind of screwed this up. Is the W&W ran under its own livery, meaning Waynesburg and Washington Railroad, from 1875, 1876, when the line was done, till 1882, 1885, right around there. The B&O was in Washington, the Penzi was in Washington. Both wanted the W&W because they knew there was coal in Greene County that had to come out sometime. 20s, 30s, 70s, 2000s, they knew it. So they got into a stock proxy fight to buy the W&W. The Pennsylvania Railroad won out, okay? There was a Y in Washington that used the B&O road that the W&W would turn their locomotives on because they didn't have access to the turntable yet. Once the Penzi bought the W&W, that Y was taken out because the B&O says, we're done with you. It's all Penzi. So in 1885, they were still running Waynesburg and Washington, but they were under Penzi ownership. In 1920, after the war was over and the railroads were reverted back to their owners, the Penzi reorganized in March of 1920, and that's when it got relettered and renumbered in March of 1920. It went from W&W to Penzi. So as you're following the photographs through the archives, www, March 1920, 9684 instead of locomotive 4, Penzi on the letterboards, Penzi on the rolling stock, and it's stayed under Penzi ownership. When it got to the Penn Central years, the W&W was not transferred to the Penn Central. The W&W was transferred to an insurance company, a land company, I think it was, Bob, if I'm not mistaken, under the old Pennsylvania Railroad. So it was never transferred to Penn Central, and it was never Conrail. It was under this insurance company. And supposedly that's the ownership today, to this day. The W&W is still under this land company, insurance company.
And that still exists? That company still exists?
Yeah, when Larry and Morgan were writing the book back in the 80s, they latched onto a secretary out there. She knew all about it. I had many conversations with Larry. He'd call up and say, hey, Mrs. Such and Such, this is Larry Kohler. Hey, Larry, you're not going to believe what I found in the files. And she would copy just reams of paper, W&W stuff, and mail it to Larry. He said that they were like husband and wife at one time back in the 80s when he was writing the book, because all he had to do, hey, this is Larry Kohler, and she said, oh, I'm mailing you stuff today, as a matter of fact. And she knew all about it. She knew where in the archives, exactly who owned what, the whole 9 yards. But I think she's since passed, and
So the archives that she had, they're still around, or no one knows where they're at?
they're at my house.
Oh, okay.
Long story short, the archives that we have, when I call the archives, the photographs, the paper, and whatnot, Bob, Tim, Brad Lester were the three main gentlemen who got the locomotive running back here in the 70s and 80s. Waynesburg Station was still in existence down on the south side. The guys went down there one afternoon, and there was just stuff littered all over the second floor of the station. Jump in, Bob, if I'm telling a lie. So they asked if they could have it, and they said yes. So they took big trash bags and gathered all of this paper, ledgers, anything that they could that wasn't nailed down, and then they spread it out on the floor and vacuumed each piece of paper, and that's how the book was written. So Larry had all the archives. I went to Detroit in 2000 and something for the National Narrow Gauge Convention. It was in Detroit. So I stayed at Larry's house before I went into the convention. We talked everything W&W, and the next day we got out, had breakfast, and he goes, I need to talk to you. I'm like, oh, okay. So we go down the front porch. He says, I talked to Morgan. He goes, you're the guy now. You're going home with all the archives. I went, what? He says, you're going home with all the archives. So I had this Oldsmobile Alero. I'm in Detroit, Michigan, and every square inch of my car had a banker's box of all of the archives. Larry was coming out a week later. He brought all the payroll ledgers. They're big ledgers about this big and about that thick. So as the crew now is working on the next book, we'll be going through the archives, looking through, readdressing stuff, putting the book together, and then those archives are going to go to Lewistown under the Pennsylvania Railroad Technical and Historical Society archives once we're done with them. Because I get nervous, they're at my house, anything can happen. But that's where the archives are. They're at my house right now.
So were those original documents or copies from her? Those were original documents.
Original documents. I think some of the early stuff that we have, now here at the museum, if I'm not mistaken, we have the original sales bill invoices from Bill Meyer and Small for the first 4 pieces of rolling stock. So that'd be 1877.
Wow.
Yeah, they're here in our archives. There was a box car, and there were 3 flat cars they bought from Bill Meyer and Small. And they're here in our archives. We also have some early payroll archives here. The real early stuff, the museum got, thank goodness. But the best archive, not to take everybody down the road of W&W archives, the best archive story I have is Morgan, Larry, and myself always debated the color of the structures. Well, they said, what's all Penzi? Buff and, Zach, buff and dark brown? Penzi structure colors.
I don't like iron oxide or boxcar red.
Yeah, no, structure.
Yeah.
Yeah, buff and like a dark brown trim. And then that was definitive. Morgan Larry said that's what it was. So I was bored one night and I grabbed a box of archives and I'm sitting on the floor and I'm laying everything out. And there are invoices and purchase orders. You know, they're buying switch locks, they're buying toilet paper, they're buying lanterns, they're buying spikes, they're buying hammers. All of these invoices and purchase orders. I pick up one, it's about this thick. I start reading through it, and the third page in, it says, standard structure colors, paint chips attached.
Oh, wow.
I went, that's what I said. I'm like, no way. And you remember back in the day, where they'd drill a hole in the left-hand corner of a ream of paper and stick one of those big paper clips through that go like this. I flipped it over, and on the back were 2 color chips of the original structure colors, which is buff and green. Yes, buff and green. The structure color is buff, but the trim was green.
What's buff? Is that a cream? Whitish?
Taupe.
Yeah, lightish brown.
Yeah.
See, there's only 8 crayons in my crayon. So what did I do? Snappy the picture, letter to Larry and Morgan. Morgan was still living at that time, and about 3 days later, my phone's ringing off the hook. Where did you find this? I'm like, you guys had it all along. I just found it. that is the best archive story that I can, you know. It's debated, it's talked about, everybody has their stance, and well, here it is in black and white, well, green and buff.
Yeah.
This is what it is. This is actually what it is. But those purchase orders are just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. We have 2 switch locks back in the room here, if you'll take a look. We have invoices where they bought 12 switch locks from, you know, Wilson Bohannon. Just anything. It's amazing. It's all handwritten. It's all handwritten. So that's my story.
It's a good one.
I have a totally like uneducated question. So we're saying this is the last passenger run. Were there subsequent runs of the train, or this was the end?
Passenger service ended July 9th, 1929. They were done. Steam freight service ended April 6, 1933. After steam freight service, they ran Fairmont speeders, which were little 4-wheel covered putt-putt cars. And they had the 1940 Ford Kalamazoo truck, which was a 1944 body, front end, engine, chassis with a box on the back. And they ran that into the mid-50s, doing like milk and little packages up along the line. And then after the Kalamazoo was done, then they went back to the Fairmont speeders and ran them up and down the line to keep the line open.
Yes.
When they were done with the Fairmont speeders in the late 60s and early 70s, then the Pennsy would run a truck along the line, and that counted as keeping the line open. Because again, the Pennsy knew the coal had to come out of Greene County somehow, and they were going to be the coal haulers. So they wanted to keep this line open as long as possible, so when the time came, the W&W, whatever would be at that time, would be the coal hauler.
Considering the fact that all number 4 sisters were scrapped, how did number 4 survive in presentation? Wasn't her preservation at the PRR's shops, I suppose?
Yes, there was an official that took a liking to number 4. And if you know your PRR history, that the Northumberland Roundhouse in Northumberland, PA was going to be the museum where they were supposed to have one of every type of Pennsy locomotive. Well, number 4 was chosen. First of all, it was the most complete locomotive. As they got into the latter years, they started to scavenger pieces from the other locomotives to keep 7-4 running. But number 4 was the best one at the time. So this official picked up number 4, not literally, but picked up number 4, put it in Northumberland. So it was out there with all of the rest of the historic locomotives. It was in the historical artifact collection. when I did the locomotive book, I got copies of the historical artifact cards that showed when the locomotive went in and out of Northumberland. Once they said they weren't doing that, then number 4 went to the Canton, Ohio tank shop, the Penzie shops, and it was stored in the tank shop. We got tons of photos there. In 1958, when the vice president of this organization petitioned the Pennsylvania Railroad, said, hey, we want our locomotive back. They said, sure, we'll do that for you. So they sent it to Juniata, had it restored and cosmetically restored, and then it came back here in 1958. It came out here in 1972. So it went from in service to Northumberland to the Canton, Ohio tank shops to Juniata, and then back to Waynesburg in 72.
I think it's interesting how one individual can just save, something like this.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's incredible.
You have a better chance of hitting the lottery tonight than you do. It is. Think about it.
Indeed.
It was a small line in Waynesburg, from Waynesburg to Washington, in nowhere Greene County and nowhere Washington. There were 7 of them, 7 just like her. They were all scrapped. Everything was scrapped. I got pictures down in Waynesburg Yard. They're burning box cars, stock cars, flat cars to salvage the metal. The coaches were sold. As far as we know, all of the passengers' cars were sold. But I have a picture in the winter that shows down in Waynesburg, back by the creek, partially assembled locomotives. Rods are missing, bells are missing, smokestacks, headlights are missing because they took parts off of them to put on this and sell it to keep them running. So for this to be here, you have a better chance of hitting the lottery tonight. And for Coach 6. Because when did you guys realize that Coach 6 was real?
What do you mean, real?
Well, you knew that it existed. Was that like the early 80s?
Farley found that out.
Yeah.
Farley Toothman found out someplace, dug it out of that clay pit in Georgia.
Yeah.
I don't know how he got to do that. I don't know.
Yeah, and for all, you saw the roster, the Rolling Stone, or the passenger car roster at the beginning. For number 6 to exist, it's like, wow. Why didn't number 5?
I can't find it again, but I came across on newspapers.com. I was researching the W&W, and there's all kind of stories that came up, and there's so many that I couldn't save them all, and then I went back to query that again and bring them back up, and because I went through and read them all, and I didn't save them. And there is an article, it wasn't in the local papers, I think it might have been an Ohio paper or somewhere in the Midwest, as to where those cars that were sold went. I don't know if you've ever seen that article.
Passenger cars?
Passenger cars. I found that
I've
on,
never seen
I
one.
found that on
Yeah.
newspaper, and I can't bring that back up again. I can't, I've queried, used
I
newspapers.com.
got a list of them.
You got a list of where they
Yeah.
were? Okay.
Do you have, okay, I didn't know if you knew where they all went.
Most of
or-
them went south.
Did they?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the only one that I have obviously is 6. I got
And a lot of them weren't passenger cars, they went down as offices
Yeah.
or time shacks or something for business,
Right.
or, They were taken off the trucks and, not
Yeah,
used
separate.
anymore.
All right. If there's no more questions,
What year was it the rails were pulled?
1978.
Okay.
A West Virginia scrap dealer came through in the summer of '78 and pulled 99.9% of the rails. There are still rails in the ground up in Washington from Wade Siding halfway down to Judson Wiley. There's still some rails down between Powerhouse Curb and West Waynesburg, and there are, well, we won't tell them where those 5 pieces of rail are on the line, because we got our eye on them. We know where there's 5 original pieces of rail that has been given to us.
So do I.
Uh-oh, you from West Union? Yeah, there's, up at Westwood Union Presbyterian Church, there's 5 pieces of original rail that we have to go get, that we'd like to have here for posterity. Yeah,
What happened to the right of ways? Did it revert to the surface owners?
well,
or-
that's what we were discussing early. Like I said, up until the 70s, when I researched it, it was in a company called Engelhard. I don't know what kind of company they were.
That's a mineral company.
Yeah, they bought 2 tracts of land, the Greene County part and the Washington County part. So up until that time, they owned it. After that, I haven't researched it, so I don't know if it's reverted to the landowners or, I have no idea.
I take note that there was some time in which number 4 was missing such components as the headlight and such. I take note that those components are back on. Did you make replicas of those, or?
The headlight's original, the bell's original, we just bought the whistle. Reproduction, builder's plates are being, poured right now.
Okay.
Tim Spasato from the Aegis Steam Roundhouse out in Sugar Creek, he donated a steam gauge. A friend of mine from Ohio donated a vacuum brake gauge, and I think is that all we need, Zach? I think. Yeah, we don't, there's nothing else that we need.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we pretty much, between donations and purchases, we pretty much got every appliance. Oh, we need one injector. There are 2 injectors, one on each side of the cab, the boiler. Tim donated 1 injector, we need another one. The plan is for the Harvest Festival is to have the entire cab cleaned, repainted, and all the appliances on the back head to show what the locomotive looked like in service. So if you come back during the Harvest Festival, hopefully we'll have all the appliances mounted, and the locomotive from stem to stern will look exactly as she did in service years.
That's the second week of October, is that?
Yeah. Harvest Festival, 9, 10, 10, 11.
8,
8, 9, 8, 9.
Well, is your goal, will that locomotive ever run? I mean, actually,
Do you want my honest answer? No.
no.
In this configuration, we think it needs a new boiler.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
But obviously, you can do that fabricated like today.
Oh yeah, for like $500,000. Yeah. In this configuration, probably not. Yeah.
So that is the price of to redo the
Oh,
boiler.
At least, if this locomotive were to be restored, it'd be $1 million+, $1.5 million. Easily,
Wow.
easily. Yes.
Make your checks payable.
Make your check payable to Green County Historic. See the young ladies over there, they would gladly accept your donation. Yeah, it's, it was just pounded to death during its in-service years. They kept it as operable as possible. The only thing that saved this locomotive is that, if you remember, when it was down at the fairgrounds, it was undercover. It had the shed roof, and when it came out here, they brought the shed roof out. So it wasn't a true park engine that got hammered by the weather. Yes, it did deteriorate, but the shed roof kept it pretty good. And then when we got the new building here about 10 years ago, that just sealed the deal. So our goal with the locomotive is to stabilize and cosmetically restore as best as we can with what we have. That is our goal.
That sounds like a good deal to me.
It's better than, it's the best thing we can do.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we so choose to go that next step, then that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
Right now, everybody is on the same page of stabilize it, let's make her look pretty for the Harvest Festival and showcase her as much as we can. That's all you can do.
That's good, indeed. You gotta do what's in your budget, that's my
Yes,
advice.
exactly. With that, let's go look at the locomotive.
Sir?
Yeah, I do.
Demonstrations. Thank you. You're welcome.
Sure.
I need some air.
You got
Well, right now, the other way in it is that. But like I said, you could work
You took off faster than you were going. You don't want to get caught with that.
No, we, in the past, we've had window units in the offices, but we are currently trying to conserve energy. So, yeah, but no, this has never been air conditioned, yeah.